Hello, my friend. On today's episode, I'm speaking with none other than the Mike Boyle, who is talking about his brand new book. You need to get it, my friends. It's Designing Strength Training Programs and Facilities, the second edition. So it's his updated thinking and recipe from the original version. We talk through a lot of the things you can expect to find in the book today. And so if you want to learn from someone who has over 40 years in the industry, this is a great podcast for you. Listen to the podcast, get the book. Let's dive in. Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. And I am so stoked to welcome back to the podcast a legend, a man who needs no introduction. So excited to have him back. Mr. Mike Boyle, welcome back to the podcast. So good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm a big listener, so I like to be back on. I like to get in the repeat guest category.
Yeah, I'm so stoked that you're one of the repeat guests. I'll have you on every week if you got the time. There's plenty for us to talk about. And today I'm so excited to dive in because you put out a second edition of your book, Designing Strength Training Programs and Facilities. It's amazing. I started reading it already. I'm not all the way through yet, but I'm halfway, and it's full of a ton of updated thoughts and perspectives from you from your first time writing the book. I think it's super topical. You put a lot of stuff in there that's about the things that gym owners are experiencing right now when thinking about training and programming and designing their facilities. And there's even some sections in there that I'll probably ask you about creating community and expectations on the training floor that I really love. And so thank you for being willing to come and talk about the book. How are you feeling about its reception so far?
The reception has been really, really good. I'm very happy. We've gotten most of the Amazon reviews we've gotten because the majority of the sales have been on Amazon, and the
Yep.
reviews have been almost entirely positive, which is always good. It's amazing that even at this stage of the game, I still look at the reviews and see how many stars people gave me and read their comments. And
Of course. We
so
always will always be doing that. Yeah. Well, let's start with this. So, what inspired you to go back to this material and update it?
the big thing was having read through it and realized, wow, this is, I think with any book that you write, I would say any book you write is probably 2 or 3 years behind where you really are, because by the time you get there, you always have that feeling of, oh my God, I could go back and start over.
Yep.
And then when you have one like this, that's about, going on almost 20, probably 18 years ago, I wrote it. I probably wrote that one in 2005. And as kind of a follow-up after I wrote Functional Training for Sports, I wanted to write one that I felt was a little more kind of nuts and boltsy, a little bit more for strength coaches and trainers. And then when I read it, I thought, oh my God, there's so much stuff in here that I don't even agree with anymore. There's so many things that I would say differently. And I thought, I'm thinking this is my last kind of big project. And I said, all right, I want to update this whole thing and get it out and have everything be really current. The good thing, and we alluded to it kind of in the conversation before you hit the record button, the way publishing is now,
Yep.
you are more up to date because you can finish the manuscript and you can almost have it up within a couple of weeks,
Yep.
which in the past was never the case. So in that way, it's extremely current with what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. Well, I mean, let's start there. I remember, you have a forward by Dan John, which is awesome. And in there, one of the things that he says is, is having the knowledge is one thing. Having this knowledge is one thing as a trainer, but be able to really apply it to how you design your programs and how you create an experience for your clients is another. So what are some of the ways where your opinion has changed since writing the book the first time? What are some of those new ideas that are in this book that weren't in the first?
Well, I think a lot of them from an athletic standpoint, I would say there's a whole speed chapter that's entirely different that probably doesn't apply as much to the business for unicorns audience. But a lot of the stuff that I put in the beginning in terms of, I put a lot more autobiographical stuff in there, things about me, things about thought process, things about coaching. A lot of the first, well, not the first part is just facility design. And even that's updated. Initially, I used to say to people, don't buy half racks. Now we have all half racks. There were things that we talked about in terms of how you're going to design your facility, the percentage of open space. I think that's a big thing that's changed over the years. We just keep going to more open space. I was talking to a guy the other day on Instagram, about a place in Europe, and he was like, what do you think? And I said, I think less equipment, more space. That's what I'm always thinking. Resist the urge to buy stuff
Yeah.
that you like and have lots of. Anybody who's got a facility with lots of one-off pieces of equipment knows I can't really run groups. I can't run a business. And I think we've always approached it because I think doing a good job training teams in the collegiate environment translates really well to doing a good job training sort of the small, whatever we want to call it, small group personal training, however you kind of look at that. But the ability to say, okay, how do I get X number of people through X amount of space in X amount of
Hmm.
time really is fundamentally what it comes down to is how do I make money at this? And you don't make money as a hobbyist who buys equipment that he likes or buys equipment that he or she wants to use. You
Yep.
make money by being able to get a group of people a really good quality workout in the space constraints that you're given based on your budget or your square footage or whatever that actually is. So that's
Yeah.
I feel like it's a really good nuts and bolts book that way.
Yeah. Well, I think it's such a great insight, Mike, because I've seen that myself, having really only been in the industry for just over a decade. I've seen myself that switch from people having gyms full of equipment to more and more open space. And I see people's reactions when they come to a place like Mark Fisher Fitness to how little equipment we have. We have so few toys. And I know we're unique and we're in New York, so we have to make use of every square inch. But I think it's a great mantra for any gym in any market is how many bodies you can fit in the space working out at a given primetime hour is directly correlated to how much money you can make, right? If you want to get people flow through the space, you need space for bodies to move. If you pack it all in with equipment, you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
Exactly. And I think we've all gone, and that's what I talked about that in the first part of the book. I said, the old weight rooms, I called them Noah's Ark weight rooms. You
Yeah.
just bought two of them. You
Yep.
had two benches and two incline benches and two, places to do overhead press, and you had two leg presses, and it was just two of everything. I'm just going to get two of everything, and that's going to be our gym. And then as people started to look at this more, the kind of the micro gym business that is Mark Fisher Fitness or is Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, those kind of places, you start looking at that and thinking they're not for somebody who's buying a membership and is just going to come in and kind of putter around and wander from machine to machine. They're a
Yep.
place, whether you call it groups or classes or whether you call it small group personal training, whatever you call it, most of us are trying to group people together
Yep.
and move them through the facility in some sort of orderly fashion. And as you said, having the right equipment, seeing the decisions that somebody's making after now at my stage, 40 years of mistakes, there are times where you think, oh, wow, that seemed like a good idea. Wasn't such
Yep.
a good idea. We went back to this
Yeah.
instead.
Is there any equipment these days that you used to think was just absolutely essential that you don't think is essential anymore?
Not as much because we've really just been the kind of place that we've always had to have some kind of pulley system. We've had Kaiser stuff for literally decades because I like the air based pulley. I think it's really conducive to both the athlete and the older client because you can go up by a pound and you
Hmm.
can do it fast. There's no whip in the weight stack. But if you came in, much like you said with Mark Fisher Fitness, if you came into our facility, the person who had not been there before would look and think, wow, there's not much variety here. There's a whole bunch of racks. There's a whole bunch of bars. There's a whole bunch of plates. There's a whole bunch of dumbbells. There's a whole bunch of kettlebells. There's really only 6 or 7 central items that are
Yep.
in that gym. But we use those items and we buy those items for their ability to be multi-use. We look at this and think, I know that I
Hmm.
can do a lot with a kettlebell. I know I can do a lot with a dumbbell. I know I can do a lot with my Kaiser pulley machines. And so I'm going to have a lot of those. We've got adjustable benches. We've probably got 16 adjustable benches and God
Yep.
knows how many dumbbells, but that allows us to get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah, 100%. I'm a big cook, and I bought a house 2 years ago, and I've been filling my kitchen with all these things I love to cook with. And one of the rules my husband and I came up with when we first bought into this house is we can only buy things for the kitchen that have multi-use. We can't buy any single-use appliances, any single-use gadgets, and it makes a big difference. It's like, no, I don't need that cherry pitter that I use for only one thing once every other year.
And what
And
you
the
find
same
is you
thing is,
clog up you clog up your kitchen space,
yeah, exactly.
and you've got to move things around. And it's I mean, it's funny because I'm reading, not that this has anything to do with my book, I shouldn't be pumping anybody else's book, but I'm reading Unreasonable Hospitality right now, which is
Good
it's a
one.
restaurant book.
Yep.
But it's an amazing book because you realize there's so much parallel
Yep.
between cooking and the restaurant business and the fitness business. And I
100%.
think they're probably the two that I think go the closest together, because you have a product that has to be really good, and then you have to serve that product effectively to a consumer who's going to be pretty discerning, and they're going
Hmm.
to know the difference between bad and good. And if you looked at that, I could be describing Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning or Mark Fisher Fitness or a good restaurant
Yep.
in Boston, New York.
Yep.
And conceptually, it's really, really similar.
Yeah, I would say I couldn't agree more. I think it's part of the reason why I kind of felt so comfortable up first in fitness, because my background was in hospitality. Even though I've never been a trainer a day in my life, I've always felt like I know this space. I know creating this kind of service, and in part because they're so similar. And I think a lot of gym owners should read more books about hospitality.
Absolutely.
Including
It's funny.
that one.
I have,
Yeah.
where am I? Setting the table. I have sitting right
Yep.
here, which I'm going to read next after Unreasonable Hospitality. And yeah, I think 100%. My wife and I were in the restaurant business for years when we were younger,
Right.
bartender, waitress, and did that stuff. But you're right. I mean, it is ultimately a hospitality business,
Hmm.
very similar to
Yeah,
restaurants,
making
except
making people feel welcome, like you're expecting them, creating an environment where they are comfortable enough to try new things, right? There's so much overlap. Well,
and
actually, that's a
you
and
have
yeah,
to have a
good.
really good product.
Yeah, 100%. You got to have enough product to keep them wanting to come back, right? They have to want to come back and back and back and look forward to your product, and look forward to the experience they have with the people serving that product, the relationships they build with the bartenders and the servers and the
Yeah.
trainers, right? That's key. It's so key, which actually is a good transition. I think it's your first chapter. You talk a little bit about rules on the training floor. I think you give something like 7 rules on the training floor. And I just would love to, we don't have to go through all of them, but I would love to just hear your thoughts about how creating kind of rules for people working on the training floor is part of how you create this environment. It's part of what the service winds up becoming in your space, are the expectations you set for everyone in that space. So you can maybe talk through a little bit about why is it so important to have kind of like rules of conduct for people in the gym?
I think it's particularly important to have rules of conduct for people in the gym, because people in the gym tend to be incredibly rude and self-centered. I,
Yes.
so by having rules and saying, "Hey, here's the way that I want you to conduct yourself when you're in this facility," I think you create a level of expectation for people and say, "Okay, here, one of the simple ones we always talk about, no, I say ear pods, and my daughter was like, "They're AirPods, Dad," and I'm like, "The thing stick in your ear, and generically ear pods," but we don't allow people to jam to
Hmm.
their own music. And some people think, "Oh, that's terrible," and I think, no, it's not, because one, we can't coach you if you
Yep.
have ear pods in. Two, we can't account for your safety if you have ear pods in, because if I yell to you, "Hey, Michael, I just dropped this huge dumbbell and it's rolling towards your foot," and you're
Yep.
jammed away to whatever your personal taste was that's in your head, and your foot gets crushed, then you're mad at me. And it's antisocial, because you're not going to
Hmm.
talk to people in your group if you have your headphones on or your ear pods in or your beats on or whatever it is. So we just thought, I think, a lot of about common sense things about how we would like people to conduct themselves in the facility.
Yeah, well, I think all of that makes so much sense, and I think our listeners are probably going to be listening to along that and like nodding their head and be like, "Yes, we should do something similar," because it also contributes to the flow of people through your space, right? That if people are wearing headphones and not paying attention to each other, excuse me, or not being generous and sharing equipment, or whatever rules you put in place that help actually the interaction. They help the flow of people through the space, I think is so critical. I think people are afraid to set rules and guidelines sometimes because they want to do whatever the client wants, but that's actually not what's best for everyone.
Right. No, that idea of appeasing, I want what's best for the clients ultimately, but one level above that is I do want what's best for the business.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I always am from the hospitality idea. I always say the customer is always right up until the moment that they're wrong. There's going to be
Exactly.
a time, and that's in unreasonable hospitality. He says the exact same
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
In terms of there got to be points where you say no, that's not going to work, and
Yeah.
that's a jumping off point for us in terms of if it has to be that way for you, then you have to be
Yes.
someplace else
Yep.
because if you don't have rules and you don't have standards, then you just have this sort of anarchy. You've got people just doing whatever they want. And that's when people start throwing weights and not putting weights away. I mean, all of the basic kind of gym etiquette things that you would hope that everybody in every fitness facility would be adhering to. But when you extend that slightly further in terms of even dress, how what people
Mm-hmm.
are going to wear, there's just a lot of stuff that because you have to think about. I think of everything. I'm a big bell curve guy,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to think of everything as the bell curve and realize that there's probably 10% of the people on either end of the curve that you're not going to please, and they're probably not your people.
Yep.
But you've got to look at the 60 that's in the middle of that curve. Those are your people. And so if I've got somebody that's way out here on that, on the right hand side, that just is really offensive behaviorally, uh, then I can't have them in my facility because
Yep.
they're going to eventually drive some of my 60% away. So
Yeah.
you have to, and like, again, our rules, it's not incredibly restrictive. It's not anything
Of course.
stupid. It's
Yeah.
just, I think, a lot of the basic common decency. I think, I think some
Hmm.
of it,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I think it's a core function of our job as business owners and leaders, right? Is to put rules in place, put policies in place, put systems in place that tend to the greater good, right? If our job is to be, the kind of chief gardener of this culture that we're creating, right? Then we have to make sure that we pull the weeds once in a while. They're really clear on on what goes in the garden and what doesn't if we want to continue to make it thrive. And I think, people are afraid to have those boundaries sometimes because it requires some difficult conversations. But we both know, I'm sure, there's going to be people who are just at the either end of that bell curve who are not a good fit, and they gotta go. We can help them find somewhere else where they'll be a better fit, but they will take that 60% in the middle and make them miserable.
yeah. Or they'll shift. Well, I find that people will
Mm,
shift a lot if you initiate a discussion, not necessarily a confrontation, but just a discussion in terms of, hey,
yeah.
this is not going to work for us. The vast majority of people will shift their behavior. They
Mm,
won't go line in the sand in terms of, okay, screw you. We had
yeah.
one client, for instance, he wanted to be barefoot all the time.
Mm,
And I had other clients who were really grossed out. Now it's really strange. In our facility, socked feet are not considered offensive. Bare feet
hmm.
are. I don't really
Okay.
understand that particularly. I just know if I have 100 kids walking around in socks, I don't get one complaint. If I
Yep.
have one guy walking around in bare feet, I will get a series of complaints. So our
That's
thing
so
was,
funny.
regardless of how you feel about barefoot training, whatever it is, you need to have socks on minimally. That's the bare minimum we can accept. You cannot be barefoot. And we had one of our clients, and I had to have a couple of conversations with him over a
Mm,
couple of times. But eventually he came around and he realized, okay, Mike's going to keep talking about this with me. He's not going to ignore the fact that I'm kind of ignoring him and I'm thumbing my nose at him. It's like, no, that it
yeah.
doesn't work. And it doesn't
Yep.
work not because I'm offended. It doesn't work because I have clients
Hmm.
who are offended. And I would have to
Yeah.
look at it if it was just me, if someone said, oh, Mike's got a weird thing about toes, he doesn't like to see them, I'd have to probably live with that.
Yep.
But when I have a series of clients who, it's funny, people, I don't like to lay on the turf where he was walking with his bare feet. And I'm kind of like, but you don't
What?
mind where he walks with his socks.
So
And I don't say
strange.
that. I just think
Yeah,
that
of
to myself.
course.
But
Of course.
that is
Well, I think,
exactly the situation.
I think it's a great takeaway for our listeners. And actually, you just demonstrated something in that book, Setting the Table by Danny Meyer. He talks about this concept that you just illustrated so well, which is the idea that part of how we manage our community, how we manage people, is we provide constant, gentle pressure. Then you did that with that conversation, which is I'm going to go back and just keep talking to them about it. And over time, they're going to realize Mike's just going to keep talking to me about this until I change it, right? And it's that constant, gentle pressure that you're right will then change people's minds and have them act a little differently. And I think so many of our listeners could stand to have a little bit more constant, gentle pressure instead of what we often do, which is understandable, which is avoid the difficult conversation.
I
You've got
think
to
you have
keep
to
leaning
have a
in.
feeling about culture and how
Yeah.
you want your culture to be. And then you have to, as you said, maybe gently, maybe
Hmm.
repeatedly, kind of defend your culture. No, this is the culture. This is how the place is going to run.
Yep.
And we'd love to have you here. But we also realize that
Yeah.
if somebody's going to be expendable here, it will be you, not us.
We're not going anywhere.
No, we're
Well,
not.
I know there's so many other parts of the book that we haven't talked about yet. So I want to just spend maybe a few minutes, if you have the time, talk a little bit about the programming part of this. So what ideas are in this book about your approach to programming these days that people can look forward to finding?
The biggest difference is the core training chapter. It's crazy in
Mm,
terms of I wrote functional training for sports, and then I rewrote that in 2016 as new functional training for sports, two entirely different core training chapters. I wrote designing strength training programs and facilities in 2005, right after functional training for sports. That core training chapter was different. And then I went one step further in this one, and this one is again different. So I think from the programming standpoint, that would probably be the biggest change. And we're still not there. Honestly, I think we're still talking about breathing and how we control our abdominals and whether we how we rotate, where we rotate, when we rotate. But that's, I would say, if I'm looking at the programming part, that's the biggest difference in programming.
mm,
uh, there's probably some subtle differences in terms of, if we're looking at kind of knee dominant, hip dominant stuff, there's probably very little difference in terms of, I feel like pushing and pulling don't change appreciably, and those sections are probably reasonably short.
hmm.
There's a really long section on sled training because I think that's something that it was interesting. I was listening to. Do you ever listen to Peter Tia to the Drive podcast? I don't know.
I know it. I don't listen to it regularly, but sorry.
You should.
But
Well, one,
yeah.
I just put up a thing. Listen to his most recent one about. He calls it the centenarian decathlon. So he talks about the
Mm,
things that you want to be able to do in the last 10 years of your life
wow.
and how you should be training. He's got it's philosophically, it's very, very interesting. Anyway, he also just wrote a new book called Outlive. I shouldn't be pumping. I'm pumping other people's books on this. I'm not going to sell very many books for me, but I might sell some for some other people. But uh, and one of the things he talks about is the ability, I think, to push a sled 100 steps that has your body weight on it, because he talks about things that, as a like, you're old and suddenly you realize, wait a second, I've got to
Mm,
drag my significant other
yes.
to safety at some point, or from one room to another, or to get to an ambulance, or whatever it is. He said, there are going to be these sort of life skills, on and off the toilet, up and down the stairs, up from the floor. And so much of this stuff we would look at as functional training, right? We would say, oh,
Hmm.
that falls in that realm of functional training that we are programming, but yet so much of it are the things that you also want to be able to do late in
Yeah.
life, which is why when I look at this book, even though it probably initially was written for athletes and coaches, when I look at it now, I think it's really written for everybody, because getting people, and this is why I love Atia's stuff. He said probably the number one thing you can do if you want to live a better, longer life is to get stronger.
Yeah, for sure.
And you've been through it at, I'm sure, at your place, but
Yep.
it's amazing to watch people who can't get up and down off the ground anymore.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's a really telling thing when you look at someone and realize, wow, they've got it. He said one of the things, basically, I called it an elder get up, and one of my friends got mad at me, and she said, you can't use the word elder. But in the elder get up, you should be able to get up off the ground
Hmm.
with only one touch.
Sure.
And you realize that's
That's
split
hard.
stance, lunge stance, unilateral
Yep.
stance, balance, all of these things, core, but
Hmm.
your ability to sort of navigate late in life is really going to come down to you. People don't like the word functional anymore. I don't know what the right word is if it's not functional, but it's
Yeah.
that ability to be functionally strong
Yeah.
makes a difference.
I yeah, maybe I don't know if it's a better word or not, but like something that's practically strong, right? Just to be able to practically do what you want to do in your life. And I'm hearing so many more people in like our Unicorn Study members when they talk about the new clients that are coming in to their gyms and the goals that their general population clients have. More and more people are talking about they're working out now to be stronger and better later in life. That there is a lot of that energy in the general population. People see the connection now more than they did forever,
I
years
think
ago.
that's, sorry to interrupt. I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest growth area for us in
Yeah.
sort of the adult fitness market is realizing that because, and I was listening to this Tia podcast today in my drive in, but his thing is that if you can still breathe and move, there's no point of no return. But I look at some people sometimes and think, wow, you can get really close to a point of no return where you look and think, wow, this person has let themselves go so far
Yeah.
that they can barely
Hmm.
get up and down out of a chair with two legs. There's no chance that anything in split stance is going to be able to be done in terms of, getting up off the floor without help or,
Sure.
having to, like he was talking about one of the tasks was being able to lift 30 pounds over your head so you could pick up a kid.
Uh huh.
And there are so many of these life skills, things that we're going to deal with maybe as grandparents at some point in our
Hmm.
life, where you think, wow. And this will make you laugh at my son. I got the most left-handed compliment the other day in terms of, he said, Dad, because you're living proof that if you just do a little bit of stuff, but you do it really consistently for a long time, he goes, you move pretty good for a 60-something-year-old guy. He said, you don't really do that much. And I was like,
That's great. But
I
I think
know.
that's it though. So more and more people are recognizing. I think I even said this when I went to a new trainer recently where I live up in the woods now, and when they're asking me about my goals, I said honestly, I'm just working out now so I can get up and off the toilet when I'm 60, 70, 80. Or like I want to work out now to set the groundwork for me being strong enough to live through older age. And the reaction I got from my trainer, who's an amazing trainer, was like, oh, I don't hear that often. But I am hearing that kind of sentiment more and more from general population folks going to gyms. They're recognizing that, like, I don't need a six pack. I don't need to sprint fast. I'm not trying to play sports. I'm not even trying to lose weight. I don't actually care about that. I'm just trying to move well so that I don't have to have a million surgeries and I can have a good quality of life as I age. And I think it's a great lens that I think our industry should embrace more.
Yes, and I think that's why, and it's interesting. It's sort of this, it's the modification, and that's what I think a lot of the book is about. It's the
Hmm.
modification of the idea of training like an athlete. You want to train like an athlete,
Yeah.
but you want to look at what's the game. And the
Yep.
game, like for you or me, the game is now life.
Hmm.
And life is about, can I take a walk when I want to? Can I get up and down off the toilet? Can I get up and down stairs? Can I pick up kids off the ground? These are all the things that you realize at some point you wake up and think, shit, I can't do this stuff anymore.
Yep. Yeah, I
And
love that
then,
analogy. Like, well, the training might look very similar, but what's the game that people are playing? And in many cases, it's a game of parenting. It's a game of grandparenting. It's a game of grocery shopping, living life. Right? That's a great way of thinking about it.
yeah, well, that's what is interesting in that, he, like I said, this centenarian decathlon, he said he wants to be able to walk, 3 miles in 60 minutes. So he wants, which
Mm,
again, not a quick pace, but wants to be able to walk for an hour. He wants to be able to carry 50% of his body weight for a minute. And he's actually done a good job because he's kind of pulled a lot of this stuff together,
yeah.
and it's really interesting. So
Well, I think it's
tell
also
some
just a great. Yeah, for sure. It's a great just market opportunity with the, baby boomer generation being, huge aging population in this country that are not going to have access to a ton of amazing social network resources in these days that they're going to be turning to local health and wellness professionals, gyms, to find out how to live a great life in an older age. And I think this is a great opportunity. I'm seeing more and more gym owners and Unicorn City come in serving populations over 50, over 60. I think it's a great both business opportunity and way to contribute to our aging fellow Americans.
If you look at the data, being stronger and being more cardiovascularly fit
Yeah.
contribute greatly to your longevity. It's not saying you're not going to get cancer. It's not saying that something else isn't
Yep.
going to happen. But statistically speaking, people, and then you just get into the idea of stronger. Again, we go back to the functional word, right? Functionally strong. It's not necessarily, can you bench press 300 pounds, but it's, can you do 10 push-ups? Can you hold a plank? Can you do bodyweight squats? Can you do step ups? Can you do lunges? Those are the kind of things. And that's where I think the educated trainer, our market, I would say, thinking that
Hmm.
you and us are a lot of times approaching a really similar market. We're approaching intelligent consumer, most because again, for us, our adult business is booming. They're
Yep.
intelligent, they have disposable income, and as you
Hmm.
said, they're looking at quality of life issues now much more than
Yeah.
they ever had, and they're realizing that what they're doing, that suddenly the mobility and the foam rolling and the stretching and all this stuff, it all matters. It's not
Yeah.
just lift weights, it's not just sweat, it's not just ride a bike. There's so many, there's pieces to this whole kind of mosaic that are all essential, and you need to have all of the pieces. You can't. And when I talk about it just in normal training, I always talk about the idea that it's sort of it's a recipe, not a menu. That goes back
Hmm.
to your sort of cooking analogy, right?
Yeah.
Uh, it's not a menu. You don't get to pick. You can't come in and just say, "Oh, I want one of these and one of these and one of these." It's the process of, and that's, I guess, what going back to the book idea. The book is really about updating the recipe. Okay, we've made some changes to the recipe, and the recipe, the product is still, the end product that you're getting out is still roughly similar, but how we're going to go about creating that end product has changed. And in this book particularly, you get the thought process behind it. What was I thinking when I was making these changes? What caused me to make these changes?
Yeah.
And so I think it'll be, I think it's an
That's
interesting read. I haven't had anybody
yeah.
read it and not like it yet.
I think it's a great summary. Let's wrap it up there, Mike. That was amazing. So, dear listeners, if you want the updated recipe for how Mike Boyle is creating results for his clients, you got to get the damn book. Where can they get the book, Mike?
Amazon, the easiest place. I know if you're not an Amazon person, you can go to On Target. I know there are some people who are in
Yeah.
the anti-Bezos world, but I love simplicity, unfortunately, and I love well-run companies, so I'm not an anti-Amazon person. But
Yep.
On Target, if you go to On Target, I think it's ontargetpublications.com.
Okay.
But if you just type in On Target Mike
Yeah.
Boyle, it'll pop
We'll
up.
find it and leave it in the notes down below, along with an Amazon link for you pro Amazon folks. But y'all go get this book. If you are just starting a gym or you have a gym for many years, or if you're just a personal trainer, I think you can't do better than following Mike's advice on building a facility, building a culture, and creating programming that really gets your clients great results. So thank you for sharing your wisdom, my friend. I'm so excited to finish reading it myself. I'm sure I'll have you back again when I have more questions. But this was a real blast. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk today.
Thank you for taking the time to have me on. I appreciate it because I know this is a promotional appearance, so I appreciate you guys.
You'll be back again. I'm soon. I'm sure
Okay.
soon. So thank you, and enjoy your day.
You too.